Welcome. Today we are talking about object pulling, and we're going to make our own custom object pulling implementation because the one that's included with Fishnet does not seem to work for me. So if you're having the same issue as I am having, then you can follow the steps in the code outlined in this guide, and this will help you get set up with your own custom object pulling implementation. So let's get started. We're going to make a new script. We're going to call it object puller because object pull is already taken, and we'll leave that be default. Make another script called object pull master, and this will be where we'll keep a list of references to all the different object pulls so that the video game can access them later as we're playing. So object puller is going to be real simple. This is going to be our easiest. I don't think we need, oh we do. So we're going to set up our using statements here. We're going to need the system because we need to serialize certain things, and we're going to need fishnet.object and the object.synchronizing. Now I have the code up on the left hand side, but I know it helps a lot of people if I actually type the code out so that you can follow through and make the script yourself. So we need to inherit from network behavior here. So we have access to all the fun Fishnet networking functions. So we need a prefab, and I'm not sure if I'm going to bother with comments very much. We'll start with a min count. You can set up a max count if you want to, but you'll have to implement it yourself because I'm not really too concerned with max count. So we're going to create a sync object here, and because we need the values in this list to be synchronized across the server. And I want everyone accessing the exact same list. So we'll make a list, sync list of game objects, and name this pull no equal to new sync list of game objects. Boom, you're done. Your object puller class is basically finished. We have this list of objects that is the pull that we are going to be pulling from. So when we need to find a game object, we are going to reference this list of game objects, find one that's inactive, and return it to the sender. So next we need to work on the object pull master. This one's going to be a little bit more involved, but not terribly so. You should be able to follow through. Before this causes issues, I need my player prefab to not have, or at least disable, the rigid body prediction model, which we'll get into that later, and I will show you. I'll make another video for that. Okay, anyways, let's go to the object puller master. Anyways, we'll start with a fresh thing, system.collections, generic, fishnet.object, and fishnet. And so obviously we need to inherit from network behavior because this thing needs to exist over the network, and this is a singleton type network. So we're going to make a singleton version of the object pull master so that everybody across the network is referencing the exact same object pull. So we're going to make a list of object pulls that everyone can access. Object pullers. So object puller is actually the object pulls, but I can't use it. We're going to name this object pulls. Okay. We're going to need some overrides here. We're going to override the onStartServer method. So I only need the starting count, the minimum count for each object pull to be compiled basically when the server starts. It only needs to be done once, and it only needs to be done by the server. no one else should be doing this. So the clients do not make their own object pools. So obviously this is the same as awake, and we're going to set up a public static instance. So this instance here in Stace, yeah, that's what we want. So if the instance is null, the instance is going to be equal to this. There should only ever be one instance of this so that other people can reference it. All right, so if you have no object pools set up, we'll just return. So count double equal to 0. We'll just return. So now we're going to generate our pools. So for each object pooler, pool, or OP for object pool, and object pools, we're going to do, we're going to create their cache of game objects. So if the prefab is not equal to null, make a cache. All right. So we're referencing the variables over here, making sure they're not garbage. So if you have a prefab, going to the next step, we're going to adjust the minimum counts for the starting counts for all the game objects. So we're going to do here. So if your minimum count is greater than 0, create a prefab object. So for int I equals to op.min count. So we're going to start at the max while I is greater than 0 and I minus minus. Create all of your pulled objects. So we're going to make a method called create pulled object using an object pooler as the reference, object reference. So let's scroll down over here. We're going to make that method now. So this is the onStart server, generate the cache of game objects that we need for each individual object pool that's registered there. So it's not going to like pull every single network object the way the base version is supposed to do, but doesn't. It does, but I can't seem to access the prefabs using their get pulled instantiated methods. So if you're having that problem with me, the way that I was having that problem, then you had to create your own solution. So we're going to do that. So we're going to create a pulled object using an object pooler as the input. You can name these whatever you want. I do not care. I just like to use input so I know what's going on here. So if you get a null reference, return obviously. Then we're going to make a new reference. Capital game object, please. Capital game object G is equal to instantiate input prefab. Now instantiate is real bad for your game, which is why we're only going to do it one time. When the server initializes, we're going to instantiate everything that we need in this game. Now, of course, we're going to make a method that will, if you need more pulled projectiles, so if there's a lot of players and you need a lot of pulled projectiles, we'll create more as we need them. So we're going to spawn the game object and then immediately despawn it. Now, on your actual game objects that you're wanting to be pulled, you're going to need to set the despawn method to pull instead of destroy. That way, when the server deinitializes the object, instead of destroying it, it will pull it. So change destroy to pull if you haven't already done that for the objects that you want to pull. I don't need OBS up over here. So immediately despawn it. So we'll just set it as inactive and have that propagate across the server. And then once it's deactivated, we're going to add the pulled object to our list of pulls. So we made a new object, created it across the server, despawned it so that it's inactive, and add it to the pull that input.pull. So we're going to add it to this pull here, which is what people are going to access. All right, so do we need more methods? All right, so like most of these pulls are going to be referenced by weapons. So your weapon needs to get a projectile, and that needs to be pulled. So you need to be able to find your object pulls. So we're going to create a method to find an object pull using a game object as the input. And this is all I want to do. All right, obviously do your sanity check here. If your input's null, return a null object puller. So we did not find an object puller corresponding to the game object that you cast into this method. That's all that's saying. So for each object puller OP in object pulls, so go ahead and iterate through your list of object pulls that you have predefined in your object pull master. So if the input, the game object input, the prefab is equal to any of the prefabs in here, we're going to return this object puller. And obviously if you don't find anything, didn't find a corresponding object puller, return null. So we cannot use object pulling because it was not set up correctly. That should be all that we need. That's all that's in my script over here on the left. So just that little bit of code will get you going and have a functional object pulling system. Now for the implementation of it, you need to create your object pull here. And this is the object puller master script, right? I already had it on here. You may or may not need this network object. Oh, that was automatically added because it inherits from network behavior. Okay, and this also has a network object automatically added, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so our rocket, we need to define the prefab here. We're going to set our minimum count to 10, max count. We're not using this at the moment, so we don't need to worry about that. But so your object pulls, what sucks about this system is that you need to manually populate it. So for each game object that you want to populate, you're going to need to add an instance to that here. Now you can probably automate this, I'm sure, but this is just the way that I have it going. In my video games, I don't really pull that many things, so it's not that hard. It's not that much work for me to go through and manually set this up, but it's a good way to prevent errors. So for the implementation, we have a rocket launcher and a weapon controller script over here. Right, this is my weapon controller script. There's a lot of variables, but we're going to start here. So basically we have a boolean here, whether or not we can fire. We check the player if they have an ammo belt. If they don't have an ammo belt, that means they don't have any ammunition, so they cannot use the weapon. Some other things, so your consumption rate, so if your gun is going to use more than one bullet each time it fires here, your current magazine needs to be greater than your consumption rate so that you can actually fire. If your projectile prefab's null, obviously, just a bunch of sanity checks that we have here. So our projectile prefab's already been set up. So we need to, on start, find an object pool. So you can either do on start server or on start client, but because this object here exists over the network, it is a networked object. Here's a rocket launcher right there, which means everyone, all of the clients will be able to see this rocket launcher since it's a, what is it called? A scene object. So we got to set up a pull variable. So I've already set this up here. It is an object puller and it is a sync var. That's very important. Otherwise this whole thing does not work at all. So you set up the sync var when you start your server, or your however you want to handle this, you can handle it however you want to. So if the pull is null, then you can obviously assign an inspector to make things easier, but that's a lot more clicking and dragging. I don't want to bother with it. So we use the instance that we set up during the server, and we'll get an object pull using the prefab. So that will be this method. Find an object puller using the game object as the input. All right, and we'll go back to our weapon controller. We fire the weapon. We need to try to get an item using object pool. Every projectile should be using an object pool. So we'll uncomment this. So if your pool is equal to null, try to find the object pool again. So we didn't find it during onStart server, try to find it again. So maybe something was not initialized or things happened out of order, that's okay. So when we fire the weapon, we'll set up our reference. And if still the object pool is equal to null, then that means there's no pool associated with it. And if there's no pool associated with it, I don't want people using the weapon because it's gonna create garbage and I don't know if it's even gonna work. So we'll just return out, have a little debug log assertion here. And then you need to make a method to spawn the projectile. So we're going to spawn this projectile using the object pool. We'll cast in the object pool. And since it's a sync var, you should be able to send that whole object pool value over the server. So server RPC here, and I'm going to explain this section here. We cast in a position and a rotation. So for this game object, the rocket launcher, we need the rocket to fire from the muzzle. This is the muzzle here. It's just a transform that's a little bit further ahead of where you need it to launch so that it doesn't collide with the player. All right, we'll go back to our thing over here. So we cast in the rotation and the position. So if the muzzle's null, if you're this actually isn't doing anything. We don't need that. Okay, we're going to make a temp projectile equal to null, and we're going to iterate through the object pools, starting at 0, going all the way to the end of the object pool, and we're going to try to find a game object that is inactive. So if the game object's not active, that means the object is available to be pulled and used. So we'll make the temp projectile that we started here, and set that equal to the inactive game object we found in the list. Set that's position to the position that we cast into this method, and the rotation to the same rotation that you cast in. So we cast in a rotation.Euler angles, and for some reason I can't get quaternions to actually line up properly, so this is the way that I had to do it. Instead of just using the rotation and casting the rotation to the input rotation. It doesn't seem to work. I can try it and maybe see, but last time I was doing it wasn't working. All right, once we set the position of it, then we'll spawn the projectile. So the projectile spawned, then they found a pulled projectile. So if temp projectile, if we go through our object pool and we don't find, and we never actually get a pulled projectile, we never get one that's inactive, right? So here, make a new projectile since the pool was completely used. So basically what's going on is that if your temp projectile is still null, every single game object inside of your pool is active, which means they were all being used. So you need to make a new one. So we'll do the same logic. It's copy pasted from create pulled object. So this code, game object equals instantiate server spawn, server despawn, add it to the pool, right? So go back over here to the weapon controller, make sure that's correct. Instantiate a new projectile, server spawn, but we don't need to despawn it, because if I despawned it, then somebody else will be able to use it, and that would cause problems if two players are trying to use the same projectile. Add the temp projectile to the pool, and weapon adds the forces. So we have a projectile. There's a projectile here. Now we can get the rigid body, or if you're going to do raycast, you can do your raycast logic down here, which I haven't gotten around to yet. You get your rigid body and you zero out its velocity. So if it was being used previously, when it deactivated, it may have had a velocity attached to it. So say it fell off a cliff and it had like 100 meters per second going in the down direction because it was falling to infinity. So just zero out your velocities and add a new relative force using variables that you can set these up in your weapon controller. So instead of the projectile having the forces, I leave it to the weapon so I can upgrade the weapons later. And that's pretty much all the logic that you need to get this working across your server. So go ahead and build this. And then we're going to run into another issue, which you shall see. Hopefully my other stuff is still working. I don't know if server manager being on, actually I don't trust it. So the time manager, we're going to go back to Unity's physics mode, just so that everything should be default. Alright, rebuild it. Just so there's no errors, no problems, please. So you have your object pooler set up, you have your object pool master set up. So your host, join, connect. There are 2 rocket launchers. Alright, character moves and walks around. I won't go into explaining how all this works, but the character and the weapon shoots these rockets. Our object pool of initial min count 10 has been set up, and if we go to our object pool, our object pool master, here's the object pool reference, which is a child of the actual object, and in the object pool, well, I can't even see it because it's a sync var, but all of your rockets are in here, and so we start at 0, which this is the first one that was instantiated, and we'll pull from that one as we need rockets. So we have 10 rockets. Once we need more rockets, so let me grab this and reload. Alright, so we've reloaded the rocket launcher. As you can see, 2 more rockets have been spawned here. We have 20 rockets. There have been 10 in the pool, but we needed more rockets, so we go back to the object pooler. There's nothing that tells me how many are in there. Oh well, I'll have to find a way to serialize that. Okay, so creating new projectile, we have our debug log assertions letting us know there should be 20 projectiles now. So there's 10 here and 8 here. Okay, so it only needed, so some of the other ones, they deactivated before I needed them. All right, so now that our controls are fixed, I'll show you the next problem you're going to run into. So if you're using physics projectiles and you want to make a game where you can blast other players and have their bodies ragdoll, you're going to need to do client-side prediction, and that's what I'm going to cover in my next video, which I'm experimenting with at the moment. Can say I've had some success, and I'll show you. I'll make another video showing what's going on there. So we are going to join the client. Okay, so you can see the transforms are synced up. I bump him, but he does not move because his because it's client authoritative. Our projectiles exist on the server, and since the client's telling the server where he is, when I blast this guy, nothing happens. Well, he got blasted, but I think that's only because, so let me show you what happens when the host, that's because he's client host, he's tied to the thing. So I'm hitting this guy, nothing's really happening. So the server is saying he should be ragdolled halfway across the universe, but on his, there's just no physics interaction. So we're going to work on repairing our physics interaction by creating a prediction model where the positions are no longer client authoritative. So if the client is not telling the server where he's at and the server is going the other way around, then you'll be able to blast people. At least that's what I'm hoping. Alright, there is something I forgot to tell you guys. So when the server stops, when the server starts, you create these game objects, and the server stops, the game objects are here, server starts, it creates 10 more game objects. There's something, so when the server stops, there's something I forgot. I should have, you know, it's like midnight and I didn't even think about it until I was laying in bed, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna lose sleep over this, aren't I? So we have to destroy all of the object pools when we stop the server. All of the object pools need to be destroyed. So we can do like a for each object pooler OP and object pools. we're going to iterate through the object pullers and destroy all the objects in here. So if the ops dot pull dot count greater than 0 for a descending, we're going to do a decrementing pull, so int I equals to op dot pull dot count. The count is going to be count -1, because we need to exclude the max so we don't generate issues, right? I greater than -1, slightly different. Why do I keep hitting that weird sign? So I greater than -1, I minus minus. So we're gonna do, I'm using commas. This is not wrong syntax. So for each one of these that are in here, we're going to call the destroy method for the op dot pull at I. Okay, I'm having an issue over here. I can't see my keyboard. We're going to destroy all of the game objects dot pulls. Once we finish iterating through this list of object puller, we're going to take the object puller dot pull dot clear, and this is going to remove every entry that's in the object. Destroy all of the pulls. Host stop. Okay, cool. Host, we generate object pulls. Yeah, because this is one of the questions that I had, like, because if somebody else starts hosting on the same server, what are they going to use? What's going to happen if they stop hosting? Or will I get an error? So we have a host set up over here. What if he tries to host? Server failed to start. Specified port is unavailable. That's very, very good. That's very good. Okay. That solves all of my problems. Yep, I'm over it. That's it for object pulling. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to go into client-side prediction, and we're going to rip apart this entire like fishnet thing and blow this whole case wide open. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.